What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Everyday Builds. Today I've got a giant slab of red oak here that we're going to turn into a shelf. So a while back I made a video all about installing wainscot, kind of this board and batten style, and I actually installed that in my sister-in-law's house, and the plan was to always put a shelf at the top of that. And that's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. The only thing that's kind of a challenge is the fact that it's almost 12 feet long. And I tried to pick the straightest one that I could, but anything that's 12 feet long and made out of wood is just not going to be straight. I'm going to be mounting it on these brackets here, which should be strong enough. I'm going to put probably 5 or 6 of them across the wall. And I'm hoping that if this doesn't come out perfectly straight, these have screw holes that I can come in from the bottom and try to pull it down if need be. But I don't know. Woodworking is one of those things that you really never are going to know everything. And as someone who considers themselves newer to woodworking, this is one of those moments where I didn't exactly know how this was going to turn out. I've never milled anything this long. I've never had to try to get a board really over maybe 5 or 6 feet to be perfectly straight. And my basic understanding of how a jointer works is you really want the material to be able to reference the jointer beds for as long as possible. So in this case, I've got about 4 to 5 feet of jointer bed before it hits the blade. This is where you can stabilize the board to make sure that it gets that nice flat face. But with a board that's 12 feet long, 2/3 of it is hanging off the end of the bed, in which it can be doing anything that it wants, and as that board starts to interact with the bed, it's going to kind of shift and move, and there's no great way to stabilize it. The rollers are a huge help in kind of helping the material onto the bed and through the machine, but is it going to give me a flat surface? I really wasn't sure, but to my surprise, it came out relatively flat. There was still a slight bow in the board, but once I took it over to the planer and started to give it a few light passes, it really started to straighten out. And one tip with the planer is that if you do have a board that has some bow in it, if you take multiple light passes rather than one heavy pass, and you alternate sides as you go, it will tend to reduce any bow that you might have. Look at how straight that got. That'll definitely work. Once it's laid flat, all that, I mean, any curve over, a 12-foot span is going to straighten out pretty good as long as I put the brackets on straight, but that came out really good. So the next thing I'm going to do is joint one edge. So it's going to make it so that one edge is perfectly 90 to the face of this. And then after that, I can run that jointed edge up against the fence on my table saw and cut it to its final dimension. In addition to making the edge 90 degrees to the face, this also creates a completely straight edge, taking out any waves or unevenness. And here's the result. Perfectly 90 and straight. Next, all I had to do was rip it to its final dimension, but it's at this point that I'm realizing I've never ripped anything over 8 feet. So I guess it's time to rearrange my shop. Yay. From the table saw blade to my back wall was just over 8 feet long, and that just wasn't enough room to get this 12-foot board obviously in there to rip down. So I went ahead and I had to basically pivot my table saw so that I could run the board into the front corner of my shop, and then I had just enough room. And I'm not complaining, my shop is plenty big, obviously it can always be bigger, but there are situations that you just run into like this where your shop just isn't set up for certain things. After I had the board ripped down, it was then everyone's favorite task of sanding. In this case, I started with 120 and then moved my way up to 150, and that's where I stopped because I will be applying Rubio, and they don't even suggest going over 120, but I like to take it one step further and hit it with 150. All right, both faces are sanded to 150. They're really good, really smooth. And now I need to hit this edge, and typically I'll just kind of freehand the random orbit sander and hit that edge. But today I'm going to try this little contraption from Iluka tools, and it clips onto my sander, which will then allow this to ride on each face, which keeps the sander at a 90-degree angle to the edge and should make sure that you don't have any bobbling or tipping, and it should give you a really nice 90-degree edge. This attachment really did a great job, and I'll link it down in the description below, along with everything else that you see in this video that you might want to use yourself will also be linked down there as well. After sanding, I just eased the edges with a small 1/16 round over bit, that way there's no sharp corners or anything like that. And if you're searching for a new type of shop towel or disposable rag, these are the best. They're called wipe all towels, and they are by far the best thing that I've found yet, especially for removing Rubio. Before applying any finish, I like to vacuum the entire surface, blow it with compressed air, and then wipe it down with mineral spirits. After a few hours of dry time, it's time to hit it with some Rubio Black. And the Rubio application process really doesn't get any easier. You basically smear it on and wipe it off, and then wipe it off some more. And that's exactly where those wipe all towels really shine. But one tip I do have is when it comes to actually buffing the finish into the grain is to get some white Scotch-Brite pads, which most people use, but get the big pads that you can cut into a circle, or you can even keep it a square. And then I like to stick it onto a random orbit sander, and it really helps just buff it in and really saves your arms from having to do all that work, and it gives an amazing finish. Once I get one side all buffed in, I flip it over and do the exact same thing on the other side. And I know red oak isn't the most desirable of woods, but I think that's only because of that golden red oak color that you saw in every kitchen in the 80s and 90s, but with the right color, it's beautiful. And after a good wipe down with those wipe all towels I've been talking about, the shelf is done and it's time to install. I mean, how could you not like that? Look at that grain. There's nothing too tricky about the installation of the shelf. It's really just mounting some brackets and then setting the shelf on those brackets. And the first thing I did was I ran some painter's tape along the tops. That way I could mark the location of each bracket. There's going to be 6 in total. Once I had the location marked for each bracket, I then came back and traced out each screw hole for each bracket. After that, I pre-drilled each screw hole just to make it a little bit easier when mounting the brackets. And then all I had to do was line up each bracket with the holes and screw them on. And just like that, the brackets are mounted and it's time to cut the shelf down. To cut the shelf down, I decided to use my track saw, which might seem like an odd choice. Why not a miter saw? It's really just because the track saw is just a lot more mobile and I love using it. All I had to do was square up each end and cut it to its final length. Now let's take it inside and see if it fits. A few love taps and it settled right into place. It was a little more snug than I would have liked, but once I committed, there was no going back. And to finish off this build, I pre-drilled some holes through the bottom of those brackets and then secured everything down with some 1 1/4" screws. Was this the most complex build that I've ever done? No, not even close, but it's just one of those things in woodworking where you go into something not exactly knowing how you're going to do it, how you're going to accomplish what you want to do, being a little bit skeptical about whether you can do it or not with the equipment you have. but then you work through it, you make it work, and at the end of the day, you learn something new. And that's what this channel is all about. It's about getting a little bit better every day and loving what you do.